Hello, third grade, and welcome back to topic 7. Today's lesson is going to be 7-2, and we're going to work on making picture graphs. So yesterday's lesson 7-1, we were looking at how to read picture graphs and bar graphs. Today, you're going to learn how to make your own. Let's go ahead and watch our short video and then get into our notes and our guided practice together.
How do you make a picture graph? Think about this question during the lesson. Sam recorded the number of each kind of bicycle a store sold during 1 month. First, he made a frequency table. You can also collect data for a frequency table with a survey by asking people questions. What kinds of marks are shown in the table?
Okay, now before we go on, let's go back and review what we just found out. So we said that the information here is put into what we call a frequency table. Now, when you're looking at the word frequency comes from the word frequent, or how often something happens. So a frequency table will show you how often something got picked. For example, if you're doing a survey and you're asking people what their favorite sport is, how many times soccer got picked as a favorite sport, that tells you the frequency that it got picked, or how frequently people picked it. So that's where the term frequency table comes from. It's explaining to you, or it's telling you how often something is being chosen, that particular choice that you have listed in your survey. So when you're asking people questions, do you prefer this or this or this or the other thing? How often each one of those things is picked is the frequency. Now here in the question, it's asking us what kind of marks are being shown. So over here, we can see that the kind of marks that we're using are tally marks. Remember, these are groups of 5. So you have 4 lines up and down and then 1 across to make groups of 5 so that it's easy to skip count when you're looking at tally marks.
The table shows tally marks. What does each tally mark in the table stand for?
Now here, if we're looking at the tally marks and we're looking at the table that we have, the title of our table says the kind of bikes that were sold. And then we have the list of the kind of bikes, the tally marks, and the number that those tally marks represent. So each tally mark represents how many of those particular kinds of bikes were sold. So how many road bikes were sold, track bikes, training, and racing bikes.
Each tally mark in the table stands for 1 bicycle sold. Each group of 5 tally marks stands for 5 bicycles sold. Use this table to make a picture graph. First, write a title for the picture graph. The title of the table is Kinds of Bicycles Sold. Next, choose a symbol for the key. Decide what each whole symbol and each half symbol will represent. Each whole triangle will represent 10 bicycles, and each half triangle will represent 5 bicycles.
A half symbol is used to represent 5 bicycles because 5 is half of 10.
What should you do to complete the picture graph? List the 4 kinds of bicycles. Decide how many symbols you will need for each number of bicycles sold and draw the symbols.
Okay, for this section, it says select each row in the frequency table to show it in the picture graph. So if we want to look at how many road bikes were sold in the picture graph using those same symbols that we were talking about, the whole triangle or the half triangle.
There were 10 road bicycles sold.
You can see that the road bicycles are going to be one of those whole triangles because there were 10 of them sold, so it has a whole triangle. The track bicycles have 5, 10, 15, 20. So if we know one triangle is a group of 10, we're going to have 2 triangles, 2 whole triangles to represent the 20 track bicycles sold.
There were 20 track bicycles sold.
Now for the training bikes, we have 15 of them. So we have 10, which is a whole triangle, and then 5 more, which is a half triangle.
There were 15 training bicycles sold. There were 10 racing bicycles sold.
So you can see from these different examples how they were showing it in the data table and then how they were showing it in the picture graph, the symbols being used to represent the numbers of each kind of bike that was sold.
What kinds of bicycles have sold?
Now, if you're looking at the kinds of bicycles that were sold, we can see what they're listed as here in the table and in our picture graph. So we have road bikes, track bikes, training bikes, and racing bikes.
Road, track, training, and racing bicycles have sold. What statements can you say or write by looking at the triangles in the picture graph? One statement you can make is that the kind of bicycle that sold the most was the track bicycle. Why are 5 and 10 good numbers to use with the symbols on the picture graph?
Now here, the reason that we're using 5 and 10 is when we looked at the information in our data table, in our frequency table, we found out that they were all in groups of 5s or 10s. So you can skip count by 5s or skip count by 10s to reach all of those numbers. So it made sense that the symbols that we were using represented either 5 or represented 10.
The data for each type of bicycle on the picture graph can easily be separated into groups of 5 or groups of 10 with 5 left over. Now you know how to make a picture graph using the data found in a frequency table.
Okay, now before we get into our guided practice, we're going to go over our notes and then we'll solve our guided practice questions together. So for our notes, we've got our title at the top, 7-2, Making Picture Graphs. And we were thinking about how do we make a picture graph or a pictograph? You can use either name to call it because they're both reference the same thing. So first you need to collect your data, which is the information, using a survey. This is when you're asking people questions and you're recording or writing down their answers. So if you ask people for their favorite movie or their favorite place to go, or their favorite food, you're using the information that they give you and writing it down so that you can make a list to see which one got picked most often or least often. Then you're going to put the data that you collected into a frequency table. Now, this is a table where you keep track of how often or how frequently, remember frequently and frequency both come from the same word, people picked an answer in your survey. So how often they picked it, how many times they picked it. And then you're going to use the data in your frequency table to create a picture graph or a pictograph. Now for my example, I put down over here in the information, Noelle made a survey and asked her friends what their favorite fruit is. She recorded their answer in a frequency table. So over here, we can see that there's a title that tells us what our frequency table is telling us about. So we're talking about favorite fruit. We have the kinds of fruits, the tally marks, and the numbers. So the 3 kinds of fruits she was asking about were apples, pears, and oranges. And we can see that apples had 15 tally marks, so that equals 15. Pears had 10 tally marks and oranges had 5. So next, what she needed to do was decide what symbol she was going to use for her key and how much it would represent. So again, we're working with groups of 5s or 10s. So a whole heart equaled 10 and a half heart equaled 5. So now that she collected her data and put it in a frequency table, she selected the symbols that she's going to use and she set up her scale for her key. Next, she's going to put this information into a picture graph. So last, Noelle used the data from her frequency table and the symbols she chose for her key to make her pictograph. So again, here we have the title, we have the data collected, and we have the key and the scale. So apples, we said had 15, so add a whole heart and a half heart. Pears had 10, so it had 1 whole heart, and oranges had 5, so that was a half heart. Now, what can we decide from looking at our graph? We can take a look at this, and right away we're able to see that apples were the most favorited one. Most people preferred apples, and the least number of people picked oranges. Now, for number 1 in your guided practice, your question was asking, explain the symbols that were used for the number of training bicycles sold. So we can say that the symbols used for training bicycles were whole triangles and half triangles, just like we saw in our little video. Now for the training bicycles, it had a whole triangle and a half triangle. We know the whole triangle equaled 10 and the half triangle equaled 5. So altogether, those equaled 15 for the training bicycles. For number 2, it said if the whole triangle equaled 2, how many triangles would there be for road bikes and for track bikes? So the road bicycles would have 5 triangles because they had a total of 10 altogether. And the track bicycles would have 10 triangles because they had a total of 20 altogether. And for number 3, it asked you to use the information from their data table. And I'll go back and share the screen with you for a moment so that you're able to see that information. We're going to use the information from this data table to fill in our picture graph. So we know that a taco got 2, pizza was 8, and salad was 3. And this was the favorite school lunches that were chosen by different students. Now, each whole bag, lunch bag, was equal to 2 votes, and each half lunch bag was equal to 1 vote. So if tacos got 2, they would get 1 whole lunch bag. Pizza had 8, so it would get 4 whole lunch bags, and salad had 3, so it would get 1 whole lunch bag plus a half bag. Now I tried to draw these out as best as I can. Obviously, they're not the greatest looking lunch bags, but you get the idea. This one had 2, this one had 8, and this one had 3. And that takes you to the end of your guided practice questions. You're going to use the rest of the information that you have and solve your independent practice. Please make sure you annotate the word problems. You go over everything really carefully and you read the instructions really carefully before you make your picture graphs, and make sure whenever you're making your picture graphs or your frequency tables that you're doing it very neatly as best as you can. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day, 3rd grade. Take care. Bye-bye.